Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by Stephen Erikson because instead of doing an in-depth analysis, we thought we would have a bit of a chat about narrative as it is in books, distinct to film and television, but also the influence that film and television have on books. And I just generally have a relaxed chat about that. So hello, Steve. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, we've had this chat and now we're going to repeat this chat. So it was just part of our regular conversation, wasn't it? But I think there was enough there that your viewers might be either interested or amused, hard to know,
Well,
or infuriated. I don't know. Could
I don't
be.
know. Well, we have conversations like this where we just are relaxed and we sit and chat about things, and various things come up. And you go, you know what? That would actually be an interesting conversation to record. And this is what we're kind of doing here. So we'd been talking about because I'd been looking at Toll the Hounds, and you have a sequence in Toll the Hounds where there are lots of little vignettes, and from these vignettes you build out an entire sequence. And we were talking about this in relation almost to montage in film.
Yeah.
And obviously you studied film.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember being quite captivated by the discussions about the origins of montage in I guess, French cinema, but also, as you pointed out, Battleship Potemkin certainly has elements of it. And the evolution of filmmaking strikes me from an anthropological point of view as to have had a profound effect. And so, just briefly, one of the aspects of montage, which is basically a juxtaposition of scenes, and you set up a sequence of scenes that may not be sequential or may not actually contain the transitions, but the audience bridges everything, and so they make the cognitive connection between the two scenes. And if you look at the evolution of film, if you were to pick up some copies of films from the 1940s and 50s, you'll see that a lot of the transitions that we don't even see on film anymore are present. So a character getting out of bed and getting ready in the morning, having a shower, having a breakfast, leaving, and locking the door, going down the stairs, and stepping outside now is been reduced to such a point where we don't get all that transitional stuff. So the character, opens their eyes, close-up shot, lying in bed. Next shot, they're stepping outside,
But it's
waving to a cat.
hitting the alarm, turning the alarm off, and then it's the coming into work trying to do up their tie. And you've implied an entire morning routine. We don't need any of that stuff. Let's get to the scene.
And that's had a kind of a knock-on effect. And I think the thing to, and it's a natural knock-on effect with literature, because, and this is one thing to bear in mind, is if you were to take somebody from the Amazon rainforest who's never been outside their village, and it has no contact with civilization as we know it, the outside world, and put them in front of a film, they will not, and this has been demonstrated, they will not be able to follow the narrative. And so it is not the thing that we all take for granted in terms of how we put narratives together from visual media is actually a learned process. And we learn it as children watching cartoons primarily. So it's not a natural thing. But because we've learned it so young, at such a young age, that we just simply assume that this is how things are done. And so when it spills out and slowly spreads through other aspects of our culture, it spreads into news, for example, news programming, and it spreads into literature, into fiction. So it has it has an effect that where people take it for granted that this is just how things are communicated, when in fact that's not the case. And I think the risk there is, you look at those old 40s films and even literature from the 40s and 50s, and you see all those transitions. And you read about writers like Virginia Woolf spending 3 days trying to move a character from one room to another in a house. And you think, modern sensibilities would be, well, why did it take her that long to write that sequence? But in fact, I understand that perfectly, because there can be a lot done in that process. So montage, for the sake of the media, it cuts out a lot of extraneous information, and that's been evolving over time. So the 40s and 50s, montage, it was there, but there were more stones across the stream, and now it's just from one side to the other. You just do this hop, but a lot actually, I think, is lost. It's lost by dropping these things away to such an extent. And so this is where you get films that, like MCU universe, or those films that simply, basically, the little islands in between the action scenes are, some of the most cursory things that they do, because they're spending all their energy on the fight sequences and on the special effects, and that becomes a dominant part of the film narrative and the film experience. And I think in many respects something is surrendered there, that actually has great value. And I think the reason why we brought it all up was we were talking about the Discovery episode, but the not the last one, the one before, which took storylines from I'd say three previous Star Trek episodes and mashed them all together, but gave us the cheat notes, just the cursory summaries of those three different episodes, and seemed to think that was enough. And that was the strangest thing, to watch this and to realize that they were just going through the motions without the context of these particular scenes. So we'd probably have to go into describe these scenes, but
yeah. But before we do, so obviously I'm now acquired something of a reputation for wandering into these bizarre narratological concepts and bringing them up. But two things here, and I know we've talked about this before, but so one of the ways of thinking about the difference between montage and, say, editing, and you obviously montage, you take a whole sequence of discontiguous sequences or images, and you imply the passage of time between them, and the viewer fills in that narrative time themselves. And so it applies to reader response theory, where we talk about the meaning of the narrative is constructed in the individual viewer's brain. The text is remaining static, doesn't change, but the viewer is imbuing it with meaning. And we assume, when we watch something, that the person sitting next to us is going to get the same meaning from it that we do. And that is such a huge assumption. And for a lot of filmic montage, the implied links between things are usually very clear. And we see that in a training montage, that they start off and it shows them Rocky was the classic example of this. Trying to chase the chicken, not getting the chicken. Trying to lift the thing, not quite being able to lift the thing. And jumping between all of these different sequences, and each time showing a little more progress. Team America World Police did the world's greatest parody and explanation of a training montage. But by the end of it, we understand this is now, it's compressed a huge period of time. In that time, they've gone from zero to hero. That's what the training montage does. And it is a very constructive process, taking these disparate elements to build a narrative. Editing, on the other hand, the other way of thinking about it is, you start with, let's say you filmed all of those sequences and you go, do we need this section? No, let's cut that out. Do we need this? And editing in that sense is cutting away. It is a negative. It is removing. Montage is building and constructive. Editing is destructive. It's moving away. It's paring it away to get to, and this is where we get into cutting away the fat, trimming it away to
Yeah,
get to the meat of the narrative.
yeah, but hold on. Generally, the way it's done is yes, there is editing. That's kind of the last thing that happens in filmmaking, right? So that's the last thing. So, but there's also editing that goes in the shooting itself. So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is you need to edit to create montage, right? You need to. I mean, that's the tool by which you create montage.
Yeah, but what I was going to get to was with editing, when you're thinking of it in terms of that destructive that you're cutting away, and it's the idea is you're trying to trim away anything extraneous, which means you are privileging this core is the thing that you want to get to. And what you decide is important is deciding what you're cutting away. With montage, you're going, I'm building towards something, so you keep adding and adding and adding and build out. But when you start cutting away, this is where you run the danger of, right, I want to trim away the fat. I want to trim away what's extraneous. And you get to the meat and you go, well, this sequence is still a little too long. So we'll cut away a bit of the meat. And okay, it's still not fitting. My runtime, I'm over by a minute. If I lose 10 seconds here and 10 seconds there, and you cut away more of the meat. And the next thing you know, you're down to the actual bones that you've cut away so much that you're now just hitting the summary, the point by point summary of what was meant to happen in a scene. You have actually cut away everything that gave the scene meaning, and it's now just a summary of the points. It's a précis of the entire thing, and this is what we were talking about in relation to that Discovery episode, because it had three plots.
Yeah.
It had the plot of there is a diplomatic détente that has to be resolved. There were the trainees that were going on a training mission, and then there was the character that required psychological counseling. And when we think about that, you go, right, diplomatic détente. I'm fairly sure that happened in one of the Star Trek films.
Mm-hmm.
But also it's a classic sort of Picard storyline from Next Generation, because that's Picard was the ambassador. The trainees going on a mission. You had said Star Trek, the original series with the Galileo
7. It's a mashup. It's elements of the Galileo 7.
And one of the Wesley Crusher episodes, wasn't it?
And then a Next Generation Wesley Crusher combat exercise that goes horribly wrong. So for the original Galileo 7, it's Spock, McCoy, Scotty, and I think four other crew members who crash land on a planet, and are then besieged on that planet, and have to sort of repair the ship in order to get back up into back up into space. And the tension element is, can they repair the ship without getting attacked and being destroyed by this native species? And they don't have enough fuel to last very long up in space anyways, so it's going to be decaying orbit. Even if they can get up there, they have to reduce weight, because there's not enough fuel.
The classic, the cold equations by Godwin.
Yeah, and then that's then blended with the other storyline of Kirk is on the Enterprise battling with a commissioner, because they have to deliver medicine to a plague-stricken planet. So they're on a tight schedule, and Kirk is doing everything he can to try to find his stranded crew. So you've got these two elements are playing off each other, and of course, part of the storyline down on the planet with Spock is this is the first time he's got command, and of course McCoy is and everybody else are challenging the aspects of the decision making and the way in which Spock is commanding without sort of taking into account human feelings and all the rest. All of which is lovely, wonderfully flipped, in the final scene, with Spock making a purely human decision that ends up saving them. So you've got all this stuff going on, and with the Voyager episode, and I think I need to preface before I even get into the
Discovery episode.
The Discovery episode. I need to preface to say that there's a lot of television production out there that actually gets all this right. So this is not a case of, an old fart like me just saying, oh, all the new television these days is just crap. No, that's not the case here. Expanse gets it right. Expanse is very good at this. And what baffles me is how bad Discovery productions are at this. And I wish I had an explanation for it, but it's jaw-droppingly bad. So you had Tilly as the stand-in for Spock on the planet, and instead of really bad special effect, giant hairy ape-like guys throwing spears, which is from the original series, you have once again the snow monster, which seems to be one of Abrams' personal nightmares or something, but it shows up everywhere, right? In the new reboots. And so they have to get from their wrecked ship up to this ridge in order to get a signal out, in order to be saved. And it's been reduced to such a point where you have the recruits, and one of them dies in the crash, which seems to have no emotional impact on anyone else at all in the entire universe. It just didn't matter that this person died.
No, that's not true. There is one line at the end where they go, oh, by the way, I let his parents know that he died. As everyone in the background is having a bit of a laugh. And it's, oh, okay, you do that. And this is all great.
Yeah.
But
it's also, the thing that, and so you had all these recruits whom apparently never spoke to each other before this because they know nothing about each other. And one of Tilly's jobs is to get them to act and work as a team. And what I found extraordinary about it was, I think, there's the risk of crossing this snowy field to get to the ridge is the challenge they have. And a number of things happen there where it turns out that in the far future, humans no longer have the ability to walk and talk at the same time. Because basically what happens is, if they're going to have this revealing conversation about their backgrounds, they all have to stop in the middle of the snowy field, with the hunting monsters all around them, and lay out this whole. And it struck me, it was so childlike, it was so juvenile in this presentation of the origins of these people, so that they now all see each other as humans.
Because the Nausicaan was like, oh, the Orions subjugated us.
Yeah.
And but how can you blame him? He's the son of the Orion who led the civil rights movement, who freed you. You're like, isn't that a little contrived? That the only Orion that this guy would trust is there. Why couldn't it have been another Orion?
Yeah.
What would they have done then?
Yeah, and in fact, that defeats the whole point of it, isn't it? Because basically, the argument of the sins of the father is not even challenged in this, right? In this case, it's the virtues of the father, which gives the the Nausicaan reason to now look at this young Orion as now worthy of being included in the sense of humanity that one needs.
But they do have a moment where they all come together because they can't use their technology. The technology is going to attract the ice monsters, which are apparently are not vulnerable to phaser fire, for some unexplained reason. And they're personal teleporters, transporters that they keep using all the time in the show. They can't use those, even though they've been shown to be able to teleport huge distances, and it's not to a ship. It can just teleport you places, but they don't work. But they can't use their technology. One of the characters walks onto the ice, and then suddenly the ice just reacts and holds them in place, which is not something we knew about, not something we had ever come up. They're just locked in place. So they use their special matter to create a rope, and then they all pull together to pull them out of the ice. And you go, that's it. So you use your technology to create this rope instead of using a phaser to do it in seconds. Right. Okay.
Yeah. No. Yeah. There's all kinds of, but you see, that's one of the problems, is that the new version, the new universe of Star Trek, the Discovery universe, makes no sense, right? None of it makes sense. The telepathic teleportation makes no sense. It's just, I don't know. I'm not sure what's happened there, but
well, it's a lack of integration of the Novum into the story world. So they have transporters. Okay, so instead of having to go to a transporter pad like they did in the original series, you can do site to site, but it still has to be managed by a person. Well, now it doesn't have to be managed by a person. They can just, tap their badge and
they don't even tap their badge.
No, but I'm going to go through the list. So you tap your badge, say what you want to do, and a computer can do it. But this is the far future. You don't need to tap a badge. You don't need to tell it where you're going. It just knows.
It just knows, yeah.
What? How? It just knows when you want to teleport, where you want to teleport to, and just activates randomly.
Yeah, it doesn't. You don't have to say a word. It's clearly, telepathically triggered.
But that
anyways, yeah. So I went back and I watched the Galileo 7, and it's got its issues, but it takes its time. It takes its time in laying out. So this is what we were talking about with Montage, right? You have to actually build. You have to build something in order for the final scenes to actually have any meaning and significance. If you just hop your way to that final scene, it really falls flat because it hasn't been earned. There's been no earning of it. The characters don't earn it, and the audience doesn't earn it. And that's why we were talking about specifically that aspect. And I'd be the first to say that I took a lot of Montage on board when I was writing the Malazan series, because that's a lot of what narrative, my narrative approach stylistically was to set up all these disparate elements, and then one starts making the connection. So Gardens of the Moon, the example would be the squads all gathering on the lake, north shore of the lake, to take a boat across to Darujistan and infiltrate the city, Whiskey Jack and Company. And I cut off, that's the end of that chapter. And then the next time we see them, we actually see them from Baruch's point of view, and he's not unaware that he's looking at them, but they're down on the street tearing up the cobbles. So the reader then makes the connection of, they crossed the lake, they infiltrated the city, they grabbed a wagon and some tools, and now they're on the road. So Montage has it's infiltrated its way into narrative in a very, very strong way. And yet that infiltration and the use of Montage, and I'll say it again, is dependent upon the audience having learned it as children, that this is what Montage does, right?
Yeah, but this is why I was trying to emphasize the difference in Montage being constructive building and editing where you're cutting away and being destructive. Because I can imagine that sequence when they were talking about, we're going to adapt the Galileo 7 storyline for this, and we're going to have Tilly lead the cadets. And okay, so she's going to do a team building exercise. And what was the team building exercise in the ship? Everyone tell me your name and where you're from. And no one thought, okay, admittedly, this is the first time that Tilly has met them, but she's been given all of their names and where they come from. They are meant to be in the academy together. They've all been standing together. They should know this. So it's about building a problem. But it was an introduction, and it was so forced because it was, we have skipped introducing who all of these people are, so we need them to introduce themselves. We've cut away 2 scenes that we didn't need. Now we can just do that as the team building exercise. Oh, and then the ship malfunctions for whatever pseudo-scientific explanation for it.
I tried to track down that explanation for why it did. I couldn't catch it.
Was it a gamma wave?
It's so fast. It happened so fast, and then they crashed. And of course, the ship, again, it's the perennial Star Trek problem, is where are the seatbelts? This ship was basically this hollowed out shape, where any crash would just have turned everybody into mush. And it did for one character, obviously, because they had nothing to hold on to. It's like, I don't know. It was, yeah.
But it's, but immediately after the crash, they have Tilly say, right, you're going to do this thing and you're going to do this thing. And you go, okay, so you're going to, and it's, no, it didn't work. Oh, so we now need to go. It went by so quickly. There was no time to build the scene.
No time.
It was, this is what they said. We have trimmed away everything apart from the very core of the scene. You go, yeah, you still need the scene around it. I know that was what the center of the scene was going to be about, but you actually still need the scene. And then it's, oh, well, now we have to run to that ridge because our communicators will work better there. And you're, I'm sorry, this is the far future where you have personal teleportation devices that can read your mind, and you need to be 50 feet further up in the air for your communicators to work. That,
they got rabbit antenna, and they just wire it all up. Yeah.
That's how radios work in like the early 20th. Oh, I'm not, they have mobile phones. I'm only getting 1 bar. I need to go somewhere to get 2 bars. And it was it was a very frustrating rationale. And then we're going to run across, and then they walk, they trudge. And the thing was, whether or not people liked the show, The West Wing did an amazing job of showing how you can have 2 characters walking along, or 3 characters, or 10 characters, holding conversations as they move. That was the whole walk and talk that became very, very popular. But here, they have them walking. They show the shot of them walking. Oh, we know they're walking. Then it's, now let's have the shot where they're talking. So everyone stop.
Yeah. And the weird thing was, I think, and it's not just the question of cutting down time, because I'm sure, I haven't gone back to it, but I seem to remember that Tilly points to the ridge and say, we have to go there at least 5 times. So it's just, they're wasted lines, right? So there is the opportunity to do more than what's being done. But it was so cursory. It was so, it was almost as if the writers are saying, yeah, we got to get to that ridge in order to get the signal. And
but the thing was, there was then, like, they're basically there, and it's, oh, the monster's kind of coming. We need to distract the monster, and that's where Tilly, heroically is going to go and use herself as bait. But you have your programmable matter. Throw it over there to do something and attract the monster's attention. Put your phaser on overload, throw it away, and it'll attract the monster. I'm sure you have the ability to construct a drone and fly the drone around, and it'll be attracted to that. There are so many ways apart from the whole, well, I'll go and sacrifice myself. But it was to show Tilly being heroic. And then the others learning from her example, and them all firing their phasers. which have no effect on this monster for no apparent reason. And then they all just get beamed up.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was, I guess when we were talking about it, because this is probably where the montage idea, this is where sort of montage goes horribly wrong. And that just seemed to be, you know, the prime example of it. But in terms of dismantling that episode, I know you had a lot of fun with the detente aspects of it.
But again, it's, if it had been a Next Generation episode, or you know, part of one of the Star Trek films or anything like that, the idea of the two parties coming to this impasse and needing someone to break it up, and that's where like Kirk would step in or Picard would step in, and there'd be this whole investigation, find out what the core is, what is at the root of the problem, because they're going to say this is the problem. It's never going to be the first thing that they say. We're going to delve deeper. We'll do this. And then that would have been intercut with something else happening, like a personal storyline, which we had with the character needing psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
So you could understand that backwards and forwards. But there would have been Kirk going back and going, I can't work this out, and talking to the other officers. What we had in this was, that's a really good idea, but we don't want that talky bit. We don't want that bit. And we want the captain to be the only person who can solve this. So are they going to use their brain? No, they're going to do it because it's biologically how they grew up is again going to determine that they are the only person.
Yeah.
And like the Orion, it was a matter of birth and how they were raised. But the core issue that they had was that they didn't want one side to be able to unilaterally withdraw if there was a problem. And you go, well, that's what a clause of a contract is, when the parties can't agree or there's a problem with the contract. That's written into almost every single commercial contract, that you have a clause for dispute resolution. The fact that in the far future, these diplomats have never heard of dispute resolution, and it took this space captain going, oh, we'll have an independent body. And you go, how can you be independent? Because you're part of Starfleet. So not only are you Federation, but you're actually part of Starfleet and an officer who has to follow orders. But you were raised on that planet. Okay. But you're a Starfleet officer who has to follow orders. You cannot be impartial. But because of this, she's going to sit on the panel, and that makes everything fine. So they never considered dispute resolution. They never considered anything like that. And then because of her birth and personal circumstances, she's the only person in the entire universe who justifies it. And you go, that's not making her special. That's making the story silly.
Yeah.
Because she could have it. And what was the investigation they did? Hey, here's the problem. Oh, it's all fallen apart. I know. You go and talk to that side. I'll go and talk to that side. In the space of 2 scenes, one with the captain, one with basically the first officer, they are told outright by the other person what the problem is.
Genius.
They have, and this is what I said, they've cut away so much. They wanted to get to the bones of the story, and you went, but now all you have are the top notes. You don't have any of the development. And that, to me, is less montage and more drastic editing. Something that could have been a full episode was this detente between these parties, and then intercut it with one of the crew members not being able to deal with the stress and having to be sent to the doctor because they didn't want to go because they'd caused a bit of a scene. And then you had the interpersonal story being worked in. But here we had the 3 plots, none of them related.
No.
None of them interwoven.
None of them. I guess, and this is maybe what I was getting at. Back in you know, in the 60s with the Galileo 7, I mean, the budget for the special effects, not to mention the technical capabilities for the special effects, was non-existent. And so they had to go as minimal as possible. And even what they did show was really horrible, right? So especially in that episode. And so, but these people who wrote it and the guy who directed it and everything else, and the props people, they weren't fools. They knew it looked crap, right? So they found solutions around that. They found ways to work around it. So we didn't get to see visually, too much of the monsters on the planet. We got to see big spears with Clovis or Folsom points, which Spock points out are Folsom points. That's all we got to see. So the writers understood that that's not going to be the focal point of our story. The focal point are the characters and the conflict and the challenges they have to repair the craft and get it going, and the notions of what it is to be in command and to be a good commander and a good leader. And these become major issues because at one point there's almost a bit of a mutiny in the sense that they want a proper burial for one of the dead crewmen. And Spock is basically saying, well, there's no time for that. We got to get on with this thing because we know that the Enterprise is going to have to leave. And so that's your point of conflict, right? So that's where the story is. But I think what I'm seeing with especially in this episode of, well, all the episodes of Discovery, is all the emphasis is actually the technical aspect on the special effects. So the monster coming out of the snow, which it happens at least 4 times, I guess, when it appears.
But see, I slightly disagree here. I think, yes, they have amazing special effects and they have like a really good sort of visual for the show. Like they have great costuming. They have a lot of very good lighting. They have a lot of brilliant special effects. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is they look at a story from one of the original episodes or a Next Generation episode and go, right, tell me the story beats. That's what we're doing. And it's almost like they're copying the specific actions and the specific, what's the core of, what's that scene? Okay. And they're looking at the events and saying, right, those are the events that we need. We need a conflict here. We need to do this. And they're distilling it down to the core action, what we would consider like a narrative kernel of the very center of it. And then going, but that's all you need. Whereas when we look at all of those other episodes, they go, oh yeah, but there's a lot of talking here. We just want the thing to happen. So they're copying, it's almost like a superficial copying of what happened without understanding why it was actually engaging. And so, oh, there's a conflict. Have them argue. And but what was the conflict about? Why did the conflict arise? What is the issue? And then how do you logically or emotionally solve that issue in a satisfactory way? Because, oh, look, he's a Nausicaan, he's an Orion. It's a race narrative of the two sides hate each other. How are we going to resolve this? Can we have the Orion save the Nausicaan's life? Well, that's going to require another scene. Can we have, and they scrap everything and it's, oh, we'll just say his dad was special.
Right, yeah, but see, and this is my point, that if they did not have the fantastic scenery, budgets, special effects, I don't know if they'd be able to get away with that. And my point being, the story can be, absurdly, insultingly shallow. But if it's visually really arresting, then it's as if the argument is, well, that will be good enough to actually, carry this story along. We got monsters popping out of the snow and making horrible screaming sounds, and the phasers and all the rest, right? So that becomes the Jeopardy moments, and I don't mean the game show, but I mean actual Jeopardy moments for the risk on the characters. But the problem there, of course, is there is no real jeopardy because we've already killed off the one character who's going to die. That was, I think, just to reduce, the number of people walking across the field to have
I actually
one
can't
less.
remember. Were they wearing a red shirt? Because, maybe it was just an homage to.
I didn't notice it, to be perfectly honest. That person wasn't there for very long.
So. But the kicker for me was so the whole focus of this, instead of this being about building the team and showing that Tilly could be a leader, was no, this is to show that Tilly is a hero. They arrive back and she's, oh, I care about this team. And you go, what was the name of the guy that died then, Tilly? Because everyone's standing around laughing. You're not showing any remorse whatsoever that on your very first mission, looking after cadets, one of them died.
And that's the point, because the Next Generation episode with Wesley Crusher and the recruits, the whole episode was the fact that there was a commission, an investigatory commission to find out what the hell went wrong. Here, there's nothing of the sort. You know, like you say, she lost a recruit on her watch, and there's nothing.
No, it's not that there's nothing. She gets rewarded by becoming one of the trainers in chief for the academy. It's, well, you only lost one kid. Is this the same training school that, say, Dumbledore went to become a headmaster? It's like, oh, Dumbledore, how many kids died in Hogwarts this year? Only 5. Congratulations, have a pay rise.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that they're so blasé about a kid dies under her watch. No one cared. No investigation. No, you know what? Something went wrong. We have to find out what. And even, like, as you said, using that to frame the narrative, where they find out that Tilly actually did everything she could and is exonerated. But none of that, it's swept under the carpet. And in the background, these cadets are laughing and joking. And you go, literally half an hour ago, one of you died.
Yeah.
30 minutes ago.
Yeah, there's no recognition that, you know, the death is actually quite traumatic.
So the focus of that is clearly, it has nothing to do with the story that we have just been shown. The focus is, we need the story beats to prove Tilly is a hero because Tilly's leaving the show. And that's it. So the emotional impact then is when Tilly goes back and reminisces with Michael in their in the cabin they used to share, and then the emotional farewell for Tilly, and you go, what about the kid that died?
And it makes you then wonder why they bothered. They could have just had one less recruit, and she got them all away safely. That, to me, would actually have more impact.
But it also would have made more sense, because then you could reward her because she got everyone out alive.
Yeah, I know. It was a very strange thing. It struck me as they simply had to get rid of, they had too many people walking across the field or something, right? They just wanted to reduce the number slightly.
Or they just wanted to show that, oh, look, someone actually died.
Yeah,
Jeopardy,
probably.
But that and the overly simplistic diplomatic détente, that whole structure there. And then what we had was an actual emotional, psychological issue with someone suffering deep trauma being treated by a doctor. But it's not about, even then it was, I don't want to do this. Why don't you do it? Oh, well, okay, I'll try. Because you told me a story. That was it as well. Again, it was the simplified story beats instead of actually trying to do and build out from that core. How can you build out an actual story? Because that wasn't the story. Those were the bullet points of what the story was going to be about, and that's what they filmed. And you go, but you didn't flesh it out. You didn't add.
And this is why I'm wondering if it's not a phenomenological thing, that kind of shorthand is the proceeding at a pace that certainly I can't keep up with anymore. That it's moving too quickly between scenes in such a manner that there's actually no time to actually contemplate or consider or think about, that you simply have to move on to the next thing. So it's kind of tag team ensemble cast, people filling in particular roles.
And it could be that.
That being said, I know you haven't seen the latest episode, but latest episode is certainly a better episode. But so it may also have been that that was going to be the actor's, Tilly's last episode, as you say. So they had to sort of manipulate things, and for all we know, that was all sort of shot, sort of secondary, late shooting and all this stuff, because we don't, nobody knows what the circumstances of her leaving the show are. So this thing could have been cobbled together. I mean, it's a possibility. But it still strikes me, yeah. I mean, it's that's why I'm kind of left wondering, that is this sort of how things are evolving, and that has evolving also in the sense of what's happening in the fantasy fiction, or in literature in general. That we're also seeing something there where the action sequences are getting to the crux of the story, is the primary sort of desire for the audience, and that's the impulse that is driving narrative now. And if so, I mean, it certainly underscores my growing obsolescence, because I really need that build-up period. I need those scenes and those pages to bring the reader to the point where, when you finally get to those big sequences and those big convergences, and lives are lost, that actually means something, that the reader, and there is a response from the reader. They feel something. I've been desperately trying to feel something for Discovery, and it's just, I end up just feeling contempt, and disappointment, because it just, and yet I know I've got good friends my generation. I think of one in particular, a science fiction author who loves the series, and I haven't had a chance to sort of sit and talk with him on it, because I am utterly baffled, again and again. So.
And this is one of the things that I think actually crops up into discussion of literature and fantasy literature as well. It must serve the narrative. Only include things in the story that serve your narrative. And it's the distilling down of narrative into the narrative events. And narrative is bigger than just the narrative events. But it seems to be that truism of it must serve the narrative event. So if you introduce a character, they have to majorly impact the main story thread that you are doing. If you have a story thread, it has to be directly or causally linked to your main story thread. Everything has to be paired away, that you have no time, or at least from this particular perspective, that you aren't to take time to sit with a character, or to sit with a sequence, or to link things in any other way than direct narrative events. That people look at, that's a side quest, so it is a digression and therefore is extraneous. And you go, but if that is building character and building tone and thematically linked, it's not a side quest and extraneous. It is part of the entire narrative weave being created.
Yeah, and there's quite often things will be brought up, like not all the threads were tied up at the end of the novel, or the end of the story, or the end of the series. And it's funny, because when I was working on that stuff, I had no issue. I had no problem with not tying up threads. Leave them dangling.
Oh, really?
Yeah. To me, and early on, when I was showing up at the writing school here in Victoria and learning about this stuff for the first time, one of the instructors, just said that the primary difference between a short story and a novel is that a short story has no, there's nothing extraneous. There's no digressions. It's a very, very direct line from the beginning to the end. And whereas in a novel, you can wander off. You can wander off the main path, and slowly loop your way back, onto that path, if you choose. But you can wander, you can digress, you can explore things. And so I took that to heart, that this is, the novel is where you can do that. It's where you can move off, introduce other characters and other storylines and all the rest. And and just explore them. So it may be that there's a kind of a cross genre, across media, shifting around, that short stories are ideal for adapting to film and television. Novellas also very good. Stage plays are also great for adaptation to film and television, because they're all, as you say, they're all, there's nothing extraneous, right? It all has to serve one particular storyline or plot. And I don't know if maybe the readership is thinking now of all things in terms of novels as serving that same linear progression in some fashion.
Which
I
I
mean,
find,
it may just be that it's all blending together.
but I'm endlessly fascinated with this, because this is, it seems to me to be something that is really, really modern. This idea that no, it has to be as straightforward as possible, because either publishers don't trust readers to be able to sit down long enough to read, and they want to distill everything down as simplistically as possible. Or maybe they go, but this is what sells, and it's a greater and greater commodification of the market, because it's a tough market.
Yeah, I guess my answer would be it's a combination of the two. But also, I mean, look at the kickback on the first season of The Witcher. The fact that it was not a linear progression, right? Chronologically.
But that
And
made it,
everybody just had huge issues with it. And I thought it was great. It was fine.
but even in the first season of The Witcher, every time they changed time period, there was a line referencing, so you knew it was a different time period. They were actually really clever about it. It was really well done.
Yeah, it was.
And
But they took so much heat, they had to drop that convention for season 2. So
but maybe I'm just old and grumpy.
well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I say, The Expanse, I think, is doing a very decent job of that. So it's not like it's right across the board. Yeah.
Well, we've wandered quite off the beaten path here on what we were meant to be doing. But Steve, thanks for having a chat with me. Now everyone knows how rambling our conversations actually are.
Very true. Yeah. And it's interesting how quite often just our I guess shared frustrations with one particular television series, in the Star Trek stuff, which of course I have probably much greater allegiance to Star Trek as a universe than you do, but we tend to talk about that, and it's just, I don't want it to be a complete dump fest, but at the same time, it is so frustrating because there's so much potential there, and it's just been so badly handled.
I still think I am convinced there is something that the two of us are missing about what they're
Must be.
trying
Yeah,
to
there
do with the
must
show, or the type of show it is meant to be. Because I keep trying to watch it as science fiction, it doesn't make sense as science fiction. I'm trying to watch it as like action, space opera, and it's not even working as that.
So a soap opera, maybe soap opera,
Melodrama?
melodrama. Yeah, definitely.
I don't
Certainly
know,
has
and
elements.
it's a puzzle. But
It is. It is.
thank you
Yeah.
very much for joining me, Steve. And if I don't speak to you before then, have a very good Christmas.
Yeah. Have good holidays. Yeah. Have a good break.
And for all you still watching, thank you very much for watching and listening to two old men whinge
Yeah.
about
No kidding.
things. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.